briefing called an ATM data-driven response to Covid-19. Next slide, please. Now, it's already been introduced, but my name is Simon Hocquard, and I'm the Director General of CANSO, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Aireon CEO Thoma to tell you about a brand new partnership we're launching. Now, for the first time ever, we're making Aireon's high-fidelity satellite-based ADS-B data available, and we're completely convinced that this data and the insights that we can derive from it will provide invaluable insights, thought-provoking questions, and some of these questions are very difficult to answer both today and in the future. So next slide, please. Before we get into the data itself, for those of you that don't know CANSO, we are the voice of the air traffic management industry. Now, as an association, we bring the world's air navigation service providers, so all the air traffic control companies around the world. We are also leading industry innovators, technologists, air traffic management specialists, all together to share knowledge, develop best practices, and importantly, shape the future of our skies. Now, our members manage about 90% of all global air traffic, and we have now approaching 200 different companies as members from across the entire ATM industry. Now, that's CANSO, and I know some of you will have come across Aireon before, but for those that haven't, I'm going to invite Don to tell us a little bit more about Aireon's data. Don, over to you, and next slide, please.
Thank you, Simon, and hello, everybody. First, let me say our thoughts and best wishes are with everyone in this trying time. And this crisis has created a terrible situation for the world and an outsized impact on the aviation industry. At Aireon, we are proud to partner with CANSO on this project to do our small part in providing the benefit of our bird's eye view of global aviation. We are in a unique position of having a comprehensive set of both real-time and historical global aviation movements. At Aireon, we and our customers look at this data all day long as part of our businesses. And besides from being very depressed at looking at this significant drop in aviation traffic, we think that there's an opportunity to obtain useful insights into what is happening globally as we navigate through this crisis, and more importantly, as we prepare for the recovery in global aviation. Let me explain why space-based ADS-B data is useful. First, it's global. We use a network of 66 satellites to collect the data from ADS-B equipped aircraft anywhere in the world. Second, it provides this view in real time with an update rate measured in seconds and the latency measured in milliseconds. Third, it is ATC-grade surveillance data, which means it has a high degree of fidelity and is being used for an essential safety air traffic control separation service by 16 air navigation service providers around the world, representing over 36 countries. The collection of global space-based ADS-B data creates a rich database of aviation traffic, enabling analysis of global and regional trends. For example, on Tuesday, November 5th, before the coronavirus took its toll on international air travel, approximately 38,000 aircraft were tracked globally, and those aircraft flew about 110,000 movements or flights. On this past Monday, April 13th, about 17,000 aircraft were flying. They flew 28,000 movements. That's a 56% reduction in aircraft flying and a 75% decrease in movements. This kind of analysis is impactful, but is what you'd expect and not incredibly enlightening by itself. This is where the partnership with CANSO comes in. CANSO is an organization of the world's air traffic management industry and has a unique ability to generate useful insights on aviation data, especially as it relates to air traffic management. This partnership with CANSO will allow us to extract useful insights from that database in a manner that can support an enhanced understanding of what is happening globally, and more importantly, help us prepare for the air traffic recovery. The current crisis only highlights the need to bring experts together to help the industry best navigate these troubled times. To share some of the results of this analysis, I will turn it back over to Simon to share some of the global insights we are seeing. Simon, back over to you.
Thank you, Don. So why are we doing this now? There's no doubt that the impact of Covid-19 on the aviation industry, as Don has mentioned, is unlike anything we've seen before. So as of this morning, global pandemic cases of coronavirus are about 2 million, I think just over 2 million. And you can see here a timeline showing the overall decline in the number of global flights daily as the coronavirus cases climbed. Now, despite restrictions on traffic to Asia that began at the end of January, the global traffic numbers largely held up through much of February and even very early in March. But by the second week of March, the erosion of traffic began. And over the course of 2 weeks, we saw declines from a daily average of just under 100,000 flights to 49,000 flights daily, followed by a somewhat slower decline over the next 2 weeks to where we now sit at an average of, as Don's just said, an average of under 30,000 flights daily. Okay, so there are the numbers, but what has this meant for ATM? Now, since the pandemic first started, we've been dealing with a dynamic air traffic picture globally. Travel restrictions, changing air cargo patterns, the complete closure of international airports, the grounding of airlines, and so on. And at the same time, we're keeping the ATC, the air traffic control infrastructure, operating to enable repatriation flights, medical support flights, and the transport of vital goods. Now, to date, much of the media attention has been about the decline in passengers and the impact on airlines, but that data doesn't tell the full story. Aircraft are still flying, and quite a lot in some parts of the world. With most of the projections in passenger numbers, it's been difficult to determine how many aircraft are still flying or how much of a reduction in traffic to expect in different regions and for how long. As with any crisis, confusion reigns supreme, and only through timely and accurate data and analysis can we find our way out of the crisis. Now more than ever, we need data to help to understand the current crisis and chart our way through it. So when Aireon approached us with an offer to share their data with CANSO members, it was an offer we simply couldn't refuse. And we believe Aireon's data will enable us to take a much deeper look at global operations and to assess what trends are occurring globally and regionally on a daily and weekly basis in an effort to better answer our questions. Next slide, please. So let's first look at the global air traffic story. The next slide again, please. So the chart you see here shows flight hours, which that's the already orange line at the top, and then movement, which is the blue, air traffic movement, which is the blue lower line along the bottom. Since November 2019. Now, by the first week in February, numerous countries started putting in place restrictions on flights from China or Hubei province. Italy banned China travel on January 31st and the US on February the 2nd, as a couple of examples. Now, the chart clearly shows quite a significant drop in flight hours, the orange line at the top, starting around that time as long-haul flights declined. But the overall number of aircraft operating only changed marginally. Now, for air traffic management, there was a short stabilisation of flight hours and the number of flights. And as I said, the number of flights didn't globally significantly decline at all through February, even though airlines were experiencing reduction in load factors and revenue passenger kilometres. For example, global RPKs dropped by 14.1% in February 2020 as compared to February 2019, with a more significant drop of 41% in Asia, where load factors were as low as 67%. Just interestingly, that February time period when traffic levels remain quite high is also notably a time in which airlines in some regions, namely Europe, would later indicate an unwillingness to pay their ANS charges. So moving on to March, by March the 13th, the US had expanded restrictions to travellers from Iran and then Europe, and by the week of March the 17th, Europe sealed its borders, and many other countries took action to close their borders to travellers other than their own citizens or warn their citizens abroad that it was time to return home. This caused a flurry of repatriation flights, but the steep decline in the number of flights was evident in the later part of the month. In late March, China restricted international flights and entry by foreign nationals to reduce travel-related cases also in their country. So this chart clearly shows that even though travel bans had a large ban on flight hours, initially it did not impact the number of flight movements. When the European market imposed restrictions, that's when there was a deeper drop in flight movements globally. Next slide, please. So here, on this chart, we dive a little deeper into what happened to the traffic. Now, the numbers in the left column show the average number of unique aircraft operating daily. We've all seen pictures of aircraft parked at airports and reports of over 40 airlines grounding their entire fleets. As mentioned earlier, this past Monday, I think April 13th, about 16,780 aircraft were flying. They flew nearly 28,000 movements and almost 64,000 flight hours. That's a drop of 56% from the average number of aircraft that flew in the first week of January 2020. Now, broadly, we saw just about half of the world's unique aircraft on the ground parked within 4 weeks, which is an extraordinary statistic. And those few aircraft that continue to operate are now flying even less. The decline in average global movements in the centre column is even larger, at 74%, with 79,000 fewer movements on April 13th as compared to the first week in January. And the right column shows that the global flight hours have dropped by 72%, or by about 167,000 flight hours daily on April 13th, compared to what we've normally seen on that average day at the beginning of January. To try and bring that to life a little more, that means on average in the first week of January, each aircraft flew approximately 6 hours daily, whereas on the 13th of April, each aircraft is only flying about 3.8 hours. And as I mentioned before, there's less aircraft flying. Now, I know we all know that the air traffic has declined. However, I think it's interesting and thought-provoking to look at the different elements and how the impact on international travel and long-haul flights has affected the traffic. Simply looking at any single metric rarely tells the whole story. Next slide, please. Now, this chart shows the change in movement numbers, air traffic movement numbers since the beginning of the year. Now, you can clearly see Asia traffic, that's the yellow line, begin to fall starting in the last 2 weeks of January, with only minor effects in other regions at that time. So it's the yellow line in Asia really stands out. That continued until early March, when traffic in the Middle East, which is the bright blue line, they started to dip just before everybody else, and then that was followed closely by all other regions in a similar pattern of steep decline through to the end of March. Now, I think in general, everyone is still looking to Asia for signs of recovery, but the opening up of domestic traffic in China and some international has been offset by declines in other parts of the Asia-Pacific region. So while we see a levelling, we're not seeing signs of a regional traffic increase just yet. Interestingly, though, Air China has filed domestic schedules for the week-long May holidays coming up that offer similar capacity to 2019 levels. That, I think, is a remarkable sign of planned domestic aviation recovery. Next slide, please. Now, busy slide, this one. So here we see the change of movements at the beginning of March and mid-April by region. Now, the red and blue bars at the top show the percentage change in movements for the first week of March as compared to the number of movements in the first week of January. In other words, they're showing whether traffic was increasing or dropping from the beginning of the year. The data shows that Asia was down 28% the first week in March, and oceanic traffic on the Pacific was down only 8%. The Middle East was down 14%, North and South America and even Europe were marginally up at that point in time. Now, the red dots show the percentage decline at the bottom of the chart there in movements, so decline movements by the week of April the 12th, this week, a point at which most regions showed a decline of more than 80%. At this point, North America had the smallest overall decline, experienced a decline of approximately 65% of its ADS-B equipped movement levels, although North Atlantic traffic had collapsed by 87%. Africa and Europe, where the impacts at the beginning of March had been relatively small, had fallen dramatically, and traffic in Asia and the Pacific Ocean traffic had fallen further to 72% and 81% respectively. I think it's going to be interesting to look again at this chart at the end of April to see whether we can start to see a pattern of return growth, both geographically as well as how many and over what period that growth is returning. Next slide, please. Now, the animation you can see here shows 2 full days worth of global space-based ADS-B tracking. On the left, in the yellow, you see air traffic from Tuesday, the 5th of November 2019, the month in which many believed the first case of Covid-19 was likely transmitted. And on the right, the blue, you see this past Tuesday the 14th of April. Both Tuesdays, both in months that typically see similar traffic patterns. Now, seeing them side by side, this drives home how global air traffic has shifted in response to the pandemic. And whilst the traffic situation is absolutely dire, there are still traffic operating. North America, Australia and Asia Pacific in particular still have significant traffic. And I think North America and Australia is very much domestic. On this past Monday, I think I said previously, over 16,000 aircraft were still flying on this past Monday. And for ATM, air traffic management, that means CANSO's members are still working hard to keep airspace open and to provide safe and efficient service to aircraft still flying. And alongside that, to keep essential services operating like aviation weather, NOTAMs, essential infrastructure like navigational aids, radars, and so on. I really don't underestimate what it takes to continue doing that while still being in such an uncertain revenue situation in which you are dealing with many, many new challenges on a day-by-day basis. Okay, next slide, please. So I've spoken to you about a global picture. Now I'm just going to do a quick walk through the regional pictures and see if there's a slightly different story to tell at a regional level. So next slide, please. So the first region we're looking at is Asia. Again, you'll see on the yellow on the left is November, and on the right is April the 14th. And you can see there that decline in international traffic. So significant decline in international traffic, driven mainly by Europe and US bans, but there is still a domestic market that's very visible there. Now, from the Asia perspective, from the first week of March, it dropped 28%. Then the last week of March, it was down 69%. This is compared to the beginning of the year. And then it sort of leveled off. From the last week of March to the second week of April, it's down at 72% lower than at the beginning of the year. So between the last week of March and the 2nd of April, it seems to have leveled off. The Pacific traffic, similar picture. It dropped dramatically from the first week of March to the last week of March, from 8% down to minus 74%. And now it's at minus 81% the second week in April. Now, as you saw from the earlier graphs, the drop-off in global traffic started really in the Asia-Pacific region, and we're seeing a quick decline in long haul, primarily because of the international travel restrictions coming into place. And you can clearly see the traffic here that the hub airports are not, therefore, being fed from the long-haul traffic. But it does show there is still a fairly strong domestic market in China that is really keeping the number of movements up, as well as the Japan market, which remains fairly strong. But you can also see very large drop-offs elsewhere in the region, such as India on the left of the picture, and overall there are 72% less flights this week. So in a region that's normally fairly busy, it's a big decline. So what we've seen in Asia Pacific generally, that the stabilization of the traffic numbers is at a new lower level, has come earlier than in the other regions, and we'll be watching them closely for the earlier recovery before other regions as we go forward. So next slide, please. Now, Middle East, I think this is a really stark picture. Now, compared to the beginning of the year, the first week of March was only down 14%. Remember from the chart earlier, they dipped slightly earlier than the rest of the following Asia before the other regions. But in the last week of March, they were down minus 88%. But they seem to have bottomed out because this week, second week in April, is minus 87%. Now, for me, it's clear that the effect of dropping long-haul traffic had a very large impact on the market in the Middle East, not only because of the amount of crossings between Asia and Europe that go through the Middle East, but also obviously the heavy impact on the Middle East as a hub and spoke transfer passenger market. You can see, I think, on here that one of the very few carriers still actively operating is Qatar, and that Qatar really is keeping the numbers in the Middle East relatively stable at the moment, and it really is only Qatar broadly. Okay, moving on to the next region, please. The next region is Europe. Now, Europe, first week of March, it was growing strangely from the beginning of the year. It was up 2%, and then over the 4 weeks, it really did drop very, very fast to minus 83% at the end of March, and then the second week of April, we're down at minus 89%. For Europe, the decline has been significant, and in many ways much more significant than it's been on the domestic US market or Asia regional market. So, once the repatriation flights finished in Europe, most of the traffic that can be seen is mainly cargo with the odd business jet. It really has been a very, very steep decline in Europe. Okay, if we move on then to North America. Now, North America, interesting, big growth. North America was up 10% at the beginning of March compared to the beginning of the year. Then by the end of March, it dropped down to minus 45%, and it's now down at minus 64%. So it's not dropped. It's a fairly strong US domestic market. Although, I think the declines have been significant recently, it's not as big as everywhere else. The transatlantic traffic has been down. The North Atlantic traffic, again, was broadly stable at the beginning of March, but it dropped very quickly to minus 83% at the end of March, and it's probably stable now at minus 87% in the second week of April. But you can see there's a lot of aircraft still operating. And a large portion of that is the cargo market, both operated by passenger aircraft, but also by the large cargo carriers in the US that are still active. And I'll come back and look at that in a moment. Okay, if we move on to South America, please, next slide. So South America, again, I think this is a very stark picture. First week of March, again, it was growing from the beginning of the year, up 3%. And then it really dropped to the last week of March, minus 87%, and then the second week of April, minus 91%. Now, you can see the drop in traffic there. I think, picture tells 1,000 words, and that 91% is an extraordinary decline. Specifically, I would note that the Brazil market, which had a very, very high decline, and the traffic in the South Atlantic has nearly come to a standstill with only a few flights a day left now, which is where the biggest impact is coming. So Africa, next slide, please. Again, the picture tells a story. First week of March, no change broadly. Last week of March dropped to minus 84%, and now we're at minus 88% second week of April. There's often only a few aircraft operating at the moment. It's been quite significant. Africa as a region is not necessarily the busiest in terms of all the regions of the world, but here you can see, it really is very, very few aircraft flying at all across the region. So I'll come back to next slide, please. I wanted just to mention cargo. Now, cargo. Now, the blue dots are passenger aircraft, and the red dots are cargo aircraft. And on the left, same format as before. The picture on the left is November the 5th, and the picture on the right is April the 14th. And you'll see there's more reds than blues. Now, it's just to give you an indication of how the market has shifted from passenger to cargo. And I think there's quite a bit of an ATM message in that as well, because obviously we're still controlling the traffic. Doesn't matter whether you're a cargo aircraft or a passenger aircraft or have nothing on board aircraft. They still need an air traffic control service to be able to fly. And here you're looking at the FedEx Memphis hub, and where in the past a lot of the traffic was passenger traffic. So as I said, you can see a lot of the traffic starting to become cargo, going in out of the FedEx hub, including some of the non-FedEx carriers that are taking over charter flights. Many airlines are utilising passenger aircraft for all cargo flights, either in the current passenger configuration or by conversion. I think there was a statistic that was mentioned a few months ago, or about a month ago, that prior to Covid-19, half the world's cargo was transported all over the world in passenger aircraft cargo holds. And obviously the passenger aircraft are no longer flying, so this is This is the cause. And you see there, the statistic in the bottom right-hand corner, that's again in comparison against November versus now, and the drop in cargo aircraft is marginal, about 4%. There's probably a margin of error in there, so it's probably broadly the same amount of cargo aircraft are flying as were before. So there's a whole load of data in there that we wanted to share with you, and lots and lots of numbers. And I'm now going to hand over to Don, who will share how we plan to provide updates in the future. Over to you, Don.
Thank you, Simon. Well, just if I could see the next slide, please. Is it the? Okay, good. We're good. So this slide helps put the regional view in perspective. It summarizes the impact of this global decline across the regions. As you can see from this slide, although the decline has occurred at different times in different regions, it is resulting in approximately a 90% decline, and hopefully we'll bottom out there. But over the next several weeks, as Simon mentioned, we'll see. So that concludes the material that we had presented today. As we said before, we're going to look at this data on a daily basis, and we're bringing the full power of the CANSO members together to provide this useful analysis and insights into the data. This is just the start of a deeper analysis and dialogue between the CANSO community. We're going to be looking at this data-driven analysis to understand not only the current situation, but to help us develop mitigations to this impact of the crisis, as well as help us navigate the recovery in aviation. This is just the first of a series of such analyses that we're going to do, and bring the CANSO community experts together to explore the power of this data analytics and marry it with other industry experts that can help us see where we need to go from here. So at this time, Simon and I would be happy to entertain any questions that you have. I believe we'll be providing those over the chat, and then we'll relay those to Simon and I, and we'll be able to respond to them appropriately.
Thanks, Don. I've already got one or two questions so far. So let me I'll go for the first question straight off the bat. So how are CANSO members dealing with the crisis? And how does their perspective differ from the commonly seen airline narrative in the news? I think the question is nearly answered in the question. So CANSO members are dealing with the crisis in various innovative ways. There's two things that our air traffic control companies need to think of. One is continuing the national infrastructure of providing a safe and effective air traffic control service to those aircraft are flying, while simultaneously protecting the staff that work in those companies. So they are coming up with various different shift systems to ensure that they are protecting the staff that are working. So in the event that a member, an air traffic controller or somebody on the front line operationally becomes sick, then not all the teams are impacted to make sure the service can continue. And then they're looking at making sure that the training can be done, and that people that remain current, and the infrastructure is all maintained appropriately. Now, it differs from the airline narrative in respect of, there are still thousands of aircraft flying every day, and those aircraft still need to be provided a service. So the narrative, I think we see in media of airlines grounded, nobody's flying, is not quite true. Passenger aircraft are broadly grounded in many parts of the world, not all parts of the world, as you've seen in the charts. But there are still many aircraft flying that still need to be provided a service. So that's a different narrative, I think, that I would immediately say. Second question I've got is, do you think the aviation industry has bottomed out? If I knew I think, we all want to know that question. I believe, actually, I give you my personal opinion, and Don will feel free to give his personal opinion. I think in areas of the world, I think we are, yes, now bottomed out. I think Europe is probably right at the bottom. It seems to be fairly consistent at a very low level. Asia Pacific, I think, had bottomed out, and it's now, thinking about how it's going to recover. Africa and South America are bottomed out. because there's very few aircraft flying there. North America is an unusual position. It's dropped, as we said, quite significantly. I don't know. I think it may drop further yet. I'm not sure that the US North American market is declined all the way down. However, as Asia Pacific picks up, the flights across to the US and North America from the Asia Pacific region may offset some of the further decline on a domestic level within the US. But that's my personal opinion about that. Don, have you got anything to add to that?
No, I think you summarized it well. I think you can see from that summary chart on the regions that there's a trend that we're seeing on the regions from the January peak that we saw. And it looks like the regions that were hit hardest with the COVID virus first are hitting around a 90% decrease in traffic from January, and the rest of the regions are hitting a similar area. Now, we all hope that this is the bottom, but as we've said before, what we'll need to do is really keep a very close eye on this data, look at the regional trends, bring in the experts from those regions to help us understand what's going on at the tactical level before we can draw big conclusions on it. And that's really what we're going to do as part of this initiative with CANSO.
Okay, very good. Another question, when do you expect to see recovery? I think that's a question that everybody would dearly love to know the answer. It's interesting, when we first started really going into depth on this data a few weeks ago, with the data that we had, it's becoming quite apparent that the common V curve bounce back recovery that people were talking about didn't seem as likely. And I, from the data that we've seen and we've got, that I concur with that. I don't think this will be a V recovery when it does happen. I think we're in a, well, you can call it a U, or some people are calling it an L shape, because it's not going to bounce back fast. I think that's right. The recovery, when it comes, will be slow in certain regions. So, for example, if I think about Europe, it's going to require all the separate European countries to remove their restrictions for it to really bounce back, rather than just individual countries. And therefore, the recovery, I think, will be a slower recovery than anything that we've seen before. It will recover, but it'll be a slower recovery, and it'll be U-shaped. We're going to be at this bottom, I think, for a few weeks yet. That's my personal opinion again. I mean, Don can happily agree or disagree, but from the data that we've seen, I think that's what it's saying. I have a question here. It says, general aviation is not considered here. Do you have an idea if this increases or decreases these figures? So, Don, correct me if I'm wrong. I think GA is included. If they're carrying ADS-B, GA is included.
Exactly. We have to remember that what we see with Aireon is all aircraft that are equipped with ADS-B. So, certainly aircraft that operate in controlled airspace have to have ADS-B installed to support the mandates that are in place by Europe and the US, as well as Australia, some other countries. It's hard to say because we don't know if we have the full population, but anecdotally, looking at the evidence, GA actually has increased, certainly in the long-haul, larger GA aircraft, as certain companies, et cetera, use general aviation as a mode of transportation, corporate jets, business jets. So we certainly see some uptick in that area, but that's part of the deeper dive that we'll do as we start looking into some of this data. But it does certainly include GA aircraft as long as they're ADS-B equipped.
Okay, thank you. Another question. How do you define cargo flights? Is it type of flight as per ICAO flight planning, or through the type of operator? Now, I believe it's a type of operator. So if it's DHL, FedEx, and any other cargo operator, that's how they are defined, even if they are using other airline operators' aircraft, because they will be designated as a DHL or a FedEx aircraft, I believe. I'm probably answering a question I probably don't know enough about, but that's my understanding of how the data is represented.
Yeah, in the ADS-B message, it defines the aircraft operator can include and usually does include their flight ID, which identifies them as a cargo carrier, DHL or FedEx, etc.
Okay. Do you intend to combine additional data sets to start predicting regional long-haul traffic numbers? The simple answer is yes. If we can, we will. That's the purpose of doing this partnership. Actually, is to start to really combine all the different types of data that we can have, whether that's regionally, so going up to a global level, and back down to a regional level, and even into sub-regional as well. We have the capability to do that. Then, if we can start to look at that, we hope to be able to start to forecast with. When we think about current forecasting in aviation, historically it's always been done by passenger booking numbers from only that perspective. This is a unique chance we've got now that we have aircraft flying. It doesn't have to be the number of passengers that book a flight. It could be the number of boxes. It could be the number of passengers. It could be the number of general aviation. It could be the number of the biz jets. Actually, we have, for the first time, we have a whole set of data that's not been visible before. So we should be able to combine those additional data sets to be able to now look much clearer about the ATM impact, not just the passenger impact. Another question I have here: have CANSO members scaled back operations such as staff numbers, and do you know to what extent, if they have? Air navigation service providers, the air traffic control companies, have scaled back operations. The difficulty with air traffic control companies are that it can to train an air traffic controller can take anywhere from 18 months to 3 years. Making them redundant or getting rid of them is not the right answer, because the cost for when the traffic returns would be extraordinary, and we need to be able to ensure that from a air traffic perspective we have the capacity throughout the globe. However, ANSPs are taking actions to furlough staff where possible, where the states and the countries that allow that to happen. They are encouraging take up of time away and time off where possible on a voluntary basis, and they're looking to minimise the costs of the operations on a day-to-day basis, because simply there's no money coming in together with the rest of the aviation industry. That's from an air traffic control company perspective. There's a whole subset of companies that support the air traffic industry. And that's the other member set that we have in CANSO, from the technologists, the analytics, and so on, and ATM specialists that also are significantly impacted by this, because the way that air traffic control companies can quickly reduce their costs is by cancelling contracts and so on and so forth. And therefore, as an industry, it's quite important that we look at it holistically, from the airlines all the way through to the airports, to the air traffic control companies, to all the other companies that support aviation as a global industry. It's essential that we look at the whole. We use the word supply chain. It's the whole picture. It's the whole. All the jigsaw pieces that make up the picture of aviation need to be looked at, because it is a significant impact to all. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Dom.
Yeah, only that air traffic management, air traffic control is a critical infrastructure, right? And as you mentioned, Simon, earlier, it really doesn't matter if there's 100 flights or 300 or 10 or 1,000 flights in an area. You still have to have air traffic controllers and all of the infrastructure in place. And the ATM industry takes a very strategic long-term view. And what we've seen amongst the CANSO members is looking at that this is a temporary crisis, that we have to work together to support the long-term, aspects of it, and long-term projects that improve the infrastructure, improve the capabilities, resiliency, and safety of the network are definitely kept in mind, and the industry is going to work together to ensure that capability doesn't atrophy, in this short-term period while we have, a downturn in air traffic.
Yeah, good answer. We've had this question a number of times. Can you give examples of how CANSO and Aireon will use ADS-B data to benefit air carriers and others? Don, I'll let you go first on this one.
Yeah, so I think at the holistic view, part of the work that we're doing with this initiative is not just looking at the global aspect of what's happening from an air traffic perspective, but pulling together the members of CANSO to start doing some deep dives in it. And in fact, tomorrow amongst the CANSO community, we have the first such deep dive with the Latin American regional area, but we plan to do a continuing set of these deep dives, bringing experts in from the industry and from the CANSO membership to look at this data, to draw conclusions and support for what's happening in a given region. How do you draw parallels with other regions to what impact it'll have on a specific region? And from an air carrier specific, that's where the benefit will come in, to understand what's happening regionally, globally, etc. Now, on a specific basis, Aireon has been working with our customers, the air navigation service providers, as well as some airlines, in trying to better understand, from this data, how it can be used to support their analysis, operations, planning for what happens going forward. So there's a lot of interaction. I'd say it's surprising, a lot more interaction, at this stage, given the nature of the crisis and the benefit of trying to get any data that we can, and any analysis out of that data that will support a better understanding of what's happening and a better planning for what's going to happen in the future.
I'm not sure I can add anything much to that. It sort of leads on really to another question now that's come in. Will you share with CANSO members a more detailed set of data split in different categories: passengers, cargo, airports, airlines, similar to the Eurocontrol current reporting? Well, we can. And that would depend on, when we go into the regional deep dives, what information will add value, the biggest value to the CANSO members. And that's a conversation we want to get into the separate regions and work out what's needed, what can be done, what can we look at, what can be provided to provide that value. So, it will all depend on what each region finds the most valuable data set to help with their business. What impact will the crisis have on large transformation projects like Cesar or NextGen? That's a good question. So as Don mentioned, I think when he answered a previous question, this is temporary. Now, we don't know when we're going to recover and how long it will take to recover, but nonetheless, these are critical infrastructure for each state and for each country, wherever you are in the world. So the long-term investment programs and the really long-term investment programs and the research and development for future air traffic management is still essential, and it is absolutely essential that they continue, because if we stop and we don't keep an eye on the future, when the future arrives, we'll either be in a capacity crisis or we'll be in some other position which won't be able to service the industry in the right way. So, for me, it is essential they continue. Will there be some impact? There's undoubtedly going to be some impact. There's impact everywhere. I personally hope, and I'll be encouraging and lobbying to say that there's minimal impact, but I think there will be some. We just need to manage that as it comes.
Yeah, I'd agree, Simon, that this is a shock to the system, right? It's a shock to the entire industry, airlines, the aircraft manufacturers, the air traffic management industry. But in this case, we all have to work together on the projects that are very important to the improvement of the industry. And as I've said, what we've seen from the interactions amongst the CANSO community, there is that long-term view that has always been in place in the air traffic management industry. This is not a day-to-day operation. It's a critical infrastructure that needs to ensure its operations not only now but years from now. So we see that investments will continue. They'll be changed. It'll be different. Timing will change. Scale and scope will change. But all that will be determined really over the next 6 to 12 months as the recovery comes and everyone sees where they're at.
Yeah, that's right. There's another question that's arrived as sort of asking a sort of additional question. It's a recognition. The situation is grim, but the works will surely go on. How do you think that aircraft orders, deliveries, and new technologies and adoption by ANSPs and operators right now will be affected? Right now seems like all investments will stop radically by the operators just precisely when next gen SSR is most needed. Please share your thoughts. I think you've heard Don and I's most of our thoughts. I think what I'd add to that is things have stopped. Things are stopping right now, but it's temporary. It's not stopped and thrown away. This is stalled. It's a pause button, and I think that's the only way at the moment that the air traffic management industry is being able to cope with the, there's no aircraft. There's some aircraft flying, but there's a lot less aircraft flying, so the revenue is a lot less. So therefore, they have to cost manage. But it is a temporary pause, and I think we can maybe learn a little bit from past crises. Not that this is unprecedented. There has been nothing like this that I'm aware of at all in the aviation industry that's had this global impact for such a long period of time. But there has been other crises, such as the volcano in Europe, 10 years ago, yesterday I think it was, bizarrely, and other events around the world where things were stopped and therefore the catch-up was much harder. So we can learn lessons from other times to make sure that what we're trying to ensure that we don't make the same mistakes twice. Next question is do you see ADS-B data helping airlines and cargo companies minimize losses by better targeting of flights to the region where they could see some profit? Don?
Sure. Well, I think everybody knows the airline industry is incredibly data-driven. They look at data on every aspect of the business, from their operations to their maintenance to their passenger yields to their pricing. So we've seen, certainly through our customers and airlines that access our data, that there's a substantial amount of desire to get better insights into what's happening globally and to look at the data in an area where access to real-time critical data on a holistic basis certainly helps expedite that analysis. So I think the answer to that question is absolutely. I think that's how the industry works, and accessing this type of data to do that analysis will be really important for them to maximize the recovery from their perspective, because it's a huge shock to the airline industry, and anything they can do to help improve the exit out of the shock is very useful.
Yeah. This may be another one for you, Don, I'm afraid. When you are collecting the data, it would also be useful to know the PBN, so performance-based navigation, aspect or capability of the aircraft. Would that be possible?
Not sure I understand the question. I'm just looking at it here. So are we asking, do we know whether the aircraft are PBN equipped?
That's my interpretation of the question. Yes.
Yeah. So this is where I think the analysis of work directly with airlines comes into play, because to understand the full equipage of the aircraft will require us to dig in with the ANSP and the airlines to understand exact equipage in areas. I mean, this is, quite frankly, very similar to what was going on in the North Atlantic before the crisis hit. There is a lot of cooperation between the ANSPs of the North Atlantic and the airlines and ICAO on the operational implementation of ADS-B to allow aircraft that were properly equipped to receive capabilities and benefits that weren't available to aircraft that weren't properly equipped. So, this, we think, at least from the Aireon perspective in our work with our customers, is clearly part of the analysis that's going on and has been going on since the beginning, and this will give us a real feel for it. There's definitely going to be more opportunities in a traffic environment such as this to implement a lot more free route, etc.
Yeah. There's a question that was raised right at the very beginning, and I got subsumed by all the other questions that are coming through. So the question was quite simple. What is the reason behind starting the partnership between CANSO and Aireon? Well, I'll start, if I may. It's really simple for me. For the first time ever, we've been able to got high fidelity, highly accurate ATM global data. And whilst each country of the world has its own data, actually to have a global picture and to be able to analyse that data in this way is completely unique and a first time around the world. So for me, on behalf of CANSO and its members, this is invaluable. That's why the partnership for me is so good and important. Don?
Yeah, so it's very easy from our perspective. Our customers are the air navigation service providers. They are CANSO members. They have bet early on Aireon and supported Aireon very early before we went into operations. So this data is very unique. It's a global view. It's not available anywhere else. So our view was it's very important to share this information in a time of crisis to support not only our customers, but we are strong believers in the CANSO organization and strong supporters of that. So it seemed a very natural thing to do, to share this information with the broader CANSO community and work together to fight our way out of this crisis and navigate to certainly the best recovery and fastest recovery we can given the global situation.
Very good, thank you. Another question. Does CANSO make it formal advice or a formal letter to government and other states to introduce rescue packages like Europe? Okay, that's quite a broad question. So in Europe, as I mentioned during the presentation, the airlines have decided that they were not willing to pay the air navigation charges for February and beyond. And there is a large lobbying exercise for state funding to help those airlines by deferring ATC charges. CANSO was then involved with its members and on behalf of its members lobbying to have a similar state aid package for European ANSPs to help with their have a cash injection over the next few months before the traffic recovers. I'm pleased to say on Monday that the states voted in favour, earlier this week, states voted in favour of that proposal. And now Eurocontrol are going away to look at establishing the funding. So for Europe, that was needed, and it's absolutely right in order to be able to protect the ANSPs across Europe. In other parts of the world, CANSO deals in 5 separate regions. We've done it in a slightly different way via ICAO, and we successfully lobbied ICAO, who have written to all states across the world, ensuring that ATC and air traffic control provision is reminded the states as a critical national infrastructure, and that it should be treated as such and therefore protected as such. If CANSO is required to lobby, and it's slightly different in Europe because we're dealing with the European Commission, so you're dealing with a commission that's that sort of sits from a political governance perspective over the top of many states. In other parts of the regions of the world, you don't quite have the same structure. Therefore, you're dealing with individual states. But if it was required from a region to lobby all the individual states for a state package, if it was needed, then on behalf of our members, we would do that. Currently, we've done it for ICAO for the rest of the world, and Europe was treated just slightly differently due to the structure of the European Union. There's a few more questions that arrive. I can take a couple more. For areas where traffic has dropped dramatically to such minimums, do you have any advice on what best method to cope with the financial impact on the ANSPs? Well, from an ANSP perspective, an ANSP needs to be able to. An ANSP has costs, as any business has a cost. And an ANSP has day-to-day costs that need to be managed. And as a critical infrastructure, some of those costs, you are unable to turn off. It's a bit like, I always compare an ANSP to a factory. So if a factory decided you didn't want to make, a product anymore, you could close the factory or refit it, train everybody over a 3-month period, come back and make something new or start up again. With an air traffic company, you can't do that. It's continuously turning and working. nothing can actually be switched off. So on that basis, you're then looking to minimise your costs from as many support functions as you possibly can without impacting the integrity and the safety of the operation that you're providing. That's how the ANSPs will be dealing with it. The ANSPs will be talking to, because many of them are unionised, they'll be talking to their trade unions about how they do that, how they can do different staff rostering options and so on, in order to be able to minimise the cost in the current operation, but also be ready for the recovery when it does come. Because the last place that, if the airlines are, when flying public, which is the biggest, obviously generation of flights, do start to return to flying and airlines want to fly, and if ANSPs are unable to service that requirement, that's obviously a place that none of us, we won't be in that position, and nor would we want to be. So advice to ANSPs is to manage their costs as best they can during this difficult period, without compromising safety and without compromising the ability to return to traffic. Another question here, it says, is this information available to CANSO associate members as well as full members? It's available to all CANSO members. So the answer to that is a very easy one. Yes, all CANSO members. This is absolutely available to. I believe, there's one last question, which is, does CANSO have traffic forecasts till the end of 2020? If so, can we have it? I wish we had forecasts to the end of 2020. There's many companies out there that are forecasting traffic, and it changes on a day-by-day basis. There's a bit like, the airlines, I think, are still talking about a V curve. I don't think it's going to be a V bounce back. I think it's more U. I think as we gain more and more data during this period of time, we start to watch the Asia Pacific and the recovery and the pattern of recovery in that part of the world. That will help to form the forecast for the rest of the world as they go through the cycle of recovery. So then I think we will be able to then start to be more accurate in looking ahead at what traffic will look like. And of course, for CANSO members, when we have that data, of course we will start to share it. Okay, I think I think we've answered most questions, maybe not all of them. There's been quite a few. I've skipped through as fast as I can. I apologise if I've missed any one or two or three questions that people want to ask. Please, get in contact and ask the questions. That's no problem if we've missed them, so I apologise if I missed some. But we've come to the end of this briefing now. So I'd like to... we will send out a link, a video link that's of this whole hour for you via email for those of you who attended. So you'll get that on the email, and that'll be sent to you soon. And it just remains for me to say, this is unprecedented. It is an extraordinary global situation that we find ourselves in. We will recover at some point in the future, and all it remains for me to say is, whilst we're in this crisis mode, please stay safe, please stay healthy, and we will continue to do the best we can for flying public. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.